Berlin. I'd just like to welcome Pierre Mena, former French ambassador to Romania, Poland, and the Netherlands, as well as former director of European Affairs at the French Foreign Ministry. Thank you very much for joining us on the program, as well as our very own Douglas Herbert. First, Monsieur Mena, I want to speak to you because I want to ask you about Jacques Chirac's his views towards Europe, because he seemed to have flipped back and forth.
Yes, first, I would like to express my sadness today, and also to extend my sympathy to the family of former President Chirac. On Europe, I was his advisor, so I had the opportunity to listen to his message. And of course, his position had changed with time. But I think it is not because of his conviction, his ideas. It is because the world and Europe had changed. The main change came in 1889 with the fall of the Berlin Wall, German reunification, and the collapse of the Soviet Union. And then the world was in a new situation, with the so-called American leadership. And Jacques Chirac thought at that time that despite his reservations on some aspects of the European construction, then it was necessary to build a strong Europe, to play a role. And France, while keeping its identity, its sovereignty, had to be efficient. In order to be efficient, had to inscribe its role in the framework of Europe. But of course, this has never been easy. If it's not easy today, it was not easy 20 years ago. On the monetary field, on the foreign affairs policy with Iraq, and also defense, and of course institutions.
I mean, his whole sort of his drive, his ambition to forge a stronger Europe also alienated inevitably some people, including the United States. Yeah. The United States was very much antagonized by his, as we were saying, this sort of, the stronger Europe idea with Jacques Chirac. But not only that, you'll remember in 2004, a lot of new members, Eastern European members entered.
But he was skeptical.
Europe.
But he was skeptical of that.
He was skeptical of that too, of the European expansion to a lot of the new members.
Towards the East, yes.
But there, it's not all Europeans didn't return the same feelings towards him. In his drive to create a stronger Europe, there were parts of Europe that were very much more sort of, in a weird way, closer to the U.S. Approach than to Jacques Chirac's approach.
Yes, I agree. On the élargissement, European enlargement, Jacques Chirac was not against. By the way, he was the first politician in France to call for this enlargement. But because he thought it was absolutely impossible to say no to those countries, the only reason why they were not in the European Union was because they were under Soviet domination.
True.
But also he said if we have to enlarge, we also have to reinforce the institutions, and there came the difficulty. And as you said, as you have just said, this very strong stand in favor of Europe, for example, in favor of single currency, in favor of foreign policy, was of course not welcome by some members. A very special member, the UK, which saw already the EU as mainly a free exchange area, more than a policymaker body. And also the newcomers from the East, first of all because they were in favor of the US and NATO, and secondly because they have been deprived of their sovereignty for years and years, and they didn't want to give their sovereignty to a new body, the European Union.
And I would also just say the no to that referendum in 2005, there was the referendum to hold a referendum on an EU constitution. That was actually a French idea.
And which said no to.
And the French voters turned it down, and it was quite a shock to many people. But I guess it's reverberated in many senses to this day, because France's I guess, position as at the vanguard of trying to forge stronger European integration, it was slightly eroded by that rejection.
It was maybe a French idea. It was an idea of former President Giscard d'Estaing.
A French idea.
So it's a French idea, of course, highly coming French idea, but you recalled earlier the difficulties with both former presidents and between them. I mean, and no, this was the problem was that it was a very big constitution, a very big construction. Too complicated for the people. They didn't.
It wasn't. I think
it wasn't explained.
It
well.
was. We've had this problem today, right? You say that today with Brexit. This was what a lot of people in the Remain camp say. They say that if their biggest failing perhaps was not explaining well the stakes of really what was involved and what it was all about, and perhaps you can make the same case for this 2005 Europe referendum. Even Jacques Chirac, I think, would admit. Maybe you know better than I do whether he actually admitted to you. I should have done a better job making the case. To the French people.
If you maybe we don't have too much time here, but if you want, I described this very in depth, I would say, in my book. But it's true. At the beginning, it was a beautiful idea. It was to say, well, we should consolidate the European institutions because we had so many treaties, one after the other, and the idea to have a big constitution, maybe we shouldn't have called it constitution, but it was the case. It was a good idea. But then it became, I think it had 228 articles. And to be frank, I think that very few voters had read it, and even the signatories maybe had not read it. I'm afraid, yes.
I would just want to talk more about his foreign policy as a whole. I know that you're specialized in European affairs, but from an international perspective, when one thinks of Jacques Chirac, one thinks of his opposition to the Iraq War. The fact that the way it was perceived, the fact that he did not say yes to the Americans and the Brits, and the reaction we had in the United States, where people were, throwing out bottles of wine and French fries were renamed, and these are things that people remember in their lifetime.
You're absolutely right, but that opposition, Jacques Chirac's opposition to the U.S.-led invasion, has actually been vindicated by subsequent events, you can argue. And what was he actually opposed to? First of all, he said war should be a last resort. And he said that war is a proof of failure. Those were his words. That was one of the reasons he was against it. What he wanted to have an internationally legitimized process if there was going to be an invasion of Iraq. He wanted the UN, you might remember the famous, notorious now weapons inspectors, the UN weapons inspectors. He wanted those weapons inspections to be able to run their course, to go up till the final end and to be absolutely complete. There was a rush to war, you'll remember. Those weapons inspectors hadn't really finished their job at all. And he wanted, and this is perhaps even more important than the weapons inspectors, he wanted a possible military action to have the backing, the seal of approval of the United Nations Security Council. He wanted it to be done within a multilateral, multinational framework. And that is not what ended up happening.
Yes, I agree. There were three basic reasons for this opposition. The first one was the facts, the fact-finding, and through the inspectors, who said that they had seen nothing about massive arms destruction, weapons of mass destruction. The second point was the legitimacy, because we have to recall the first Gulf War in 1991 had been approved by the UN Security Council. There had been a resolution in November 1990 saying that the use of force was legitimate. And the third reason, which is interesting still today, President Chirac thought that this war would create a new situation in the Middle East and awake the rivalries between the Shiites and the Sunnites. And it is what happened. Because Saddam Hussein, of course, nobody said that Saddam Hussein was a Democrat or even a good leader, but he had succeeded, like, if I might take this comparison, like Tito in Yugoslavia, he had succeeded in keeping together the different religions.
Everything in check. I just want to go, sorry to interrupt you, we have to go across to France 24's